Hello, and welcome to Mayor Brown's podcast series, Credibly Challenged. This podcast focuses on risk management issues for financial institutions of all sizes, particularly those in the banking sector. My name is Matt Bisanz, and I'm a partner in Mayor Brown's financial services regulatory and enforcement practice. Joining me today is Jim Sturgeon. Jim is Chief Risk Officer of CommunityBank of Texas, and we have a very interesting program today that we're going to cover about being on both sides of the table, from founding a bank through being the Chief Risk Officer. So, Jim, thanks for being on the program.
Happy to be here, Matthew.
You founded a bank in the early 2000s, which I think is a pretty unique perspective for a Chief Risk Officer to come from. How did you approach building the risk function when you started that bank?
Well, I didn't choose to be a Chief Risk Officer. I ended up there, so I wasn't sure I ever approached it from that perspective. But, you know, I've been part of de novoing banks for a number of times. The most recent one was in the late 2000s. I grew up on the commercial lending side of the bank, corporate and middle market banking, and was fortunate enough to work in several aspects of the bank, which I think are critical in being a Chief Risk Officer. To have that vertical view of what goes on in the bank, as well as horizontal, because I've had the opportunity to work at a number of different institutions and different sizes. You know, when you de novo a bank or you start a small bank, I'm not sure you think about risk management. Again, I'm predominantly from the lending side of the bank, so when you start that bank, you focus a lot on revenue production and whatever bias you have in credit risk you bring with you, and those are the type of deals that you're willing to do and you think are acceptable for your bank. You try to surround yourself with a team of people that have other experiences and expertise in the bank, and really leave that part of it to them. You know, when you're all wearing 50 different hats, you know, and regulators probably don't like this answer. I'm not sure you focus that much on a formal risk management program. You're just doing what you know to do and making sure you do it the right way. So that's probably not a great answer for anyone else in this, but I think we stumble across what we need to stumble across to make our bank successful when we're that size and fighting for survival, especially in the case of the last one, which we did in 2007, 2008.
Interesting, but you eventually did transition to risk management as the Chief Risk Officer, and so how was that transition for you?
Well, I was fortunate enough that I had a board and was at least halfway smart enough to recognize that being a de novo bank in a major metropolitan area in 2007, 8, and 9 was not exactly a launch pad to what might be your greatest success. So we actually started looking to put some of these de novo banks together. In our market, there were a number of them in that 2006, 2008 timeframe that were started. Eventually met up with another banker that I'd known for a while, and several of my directors knew, Bob Franklin, who is the CEO of our bank. And as you may or may not know, we're doing a merger of equals now that'll create an $11.5 billion bank in our market. And Bob will also be the CEO of that bank. Bob and I did a merger of equals between his bank and mine, and I came on board to what we jokingly refer to as the Dead President's Club. I was vice chairman and basically did whatever needed to be done to help Bob at that point. And as we continued to grow that bank under his leadership, we eventually did another merger of equals with a bank out of East Texas, about 100 miles east of us, called CommunityBank of Texas. Bob became the CEO when we combined those banks, and we changed our name. We adopted their name in the merger of equals. Bob came to me one day and says, "What do you know about this Chief Risk Officer thing?" And I go, "Not a thing." And he goes, "What about enterprise risk management?" "No, what little I know, I'm not sure why you'd spend the money doing it." And from there, we launched off on an exploration that he asked me to do about enterprise risk management, the role of the CRO, and how it could help the bank perform better. And that was really how I got there. I'd like to claim there was some magic dream I had and a path I planned out to get here, but it was that simple. I think, like a lot of people in my position at that time, we learned what we needed to learn, and tried to implement in our bank. One of the great things that I had is, and this will sound trite and you hear it from everybody, and it's what every consultant will tell you, it's what every regulator will tell you, but you need to have tone from the top, and it needs to come from the top. I was fortunate that our CEO believed in that. His risk appetite is fairly low. He wants to make sure we don't take undue risk that we're unaware of, and make sure that what risk we're taking we understand and do it the right way. So that was a great asset for me to start with that, and then be able to build off his vision of what risk controls and what our risk function should be in the bank. Coincidentally, he's always been a believer, and it's one of the shared values that we all have in this management team, that we do things the right way. So, I'm not sure we ever looked at it of we're mitigating risk as much as we're doing it the right way and trying to do it the best way we can. And part of that means you continually examine what you're doing. If you find that you're taking a risk you're not aware of, or you discover there's a control that's not in place, you put it in place because that's the right thing and it's going to help you perform better.
Mm-hmm. That's a great perspective to come at it from, and yeah, the culture of compliance and the tone at the top, that is so essential, that you can have all the resources in the world, but if people don't know to use them, if they don't know that that's an important part of the organization, then it doesn't matter how many whistles or bells you have.
And we also, and again, it's probably not popular with regulators, we don't do things to just please the regulators. So we don't have an enterprise risk management program because the regulators think it's a good idea, and it checks some boxes. I mean, that's a benefit of having it. But again, we're not doing it just to check the box and just enough to get by. It's a key part of our performance. We believe if we do this right, we perform better. All of our stakeholders are better off because of it.
And there's probably some things there's probably some elements of that where the regulators agree with you, and both of you reach the same point. There's probably others where maybe you don't see as much value as the regulators do in a particular type of exercise, or you guys have to have some hard discussions about why you guys have determined something is or isn't important to the risk management program. How do you manage those conversations, manage expectations, explain your positions in a way that can almost educate the regulators about your knowledge of your bank?
Well, we've been fortunate. I always say when you're in a bank that operates very well and believes in doing things right, and we're a lending bank, or predominantly a lending bank, or we thought so too when we went public. But again, one of those risk mitigations is how we fund our balance sheet, and we just thought that was normal banking. But it turns out the street looks at us as a deposit franchise because we do such a good job of funding our balance sheet with just deposits. But all those things kind of fall in line in doing it right. And when the regulators come in and those things are working really well, it's easy to be the CRO. But we've developed a lot of things in our risk program. Most of it trial and error. Learning where we could. And so, we're a $4.5 billion bank today. Our regulators don't see, at least according to our regulators, and we're an OCC bank, haven't seen the maturity level of an ERM program in their portfolio of banks they see with us. So for that discussion was never a big deal. We always spent time talking with each other so they could learn what we were doing. We got their feedback and where they thought we could do better. So that wasn't an issue. I think if there are things we disagree with, there are more things that we don't think banks should be doing. A perfect example is BSA. I find very little redeeming value in terms of what it does for our balance sheet and our earnings to have a robust BSA program, but it's a law. So you're gonna, we do disagree with that, having to do all the things we do and be that intrusive into our customers' business, but that's not our choice. We look at it, it's a tax for being a bank. If you're going to be a bank, there are certain things you have to do, whether you like them or not, and you need to do them well. BSA is one. To a great extent, we would argue CRA, not because we disagree with the goals of what the Community Reinvestment Act is, but because we do that anyway. We think that's our responsibility just as people, as citizens of this country. We don't believe we should discriminate on any measure, whether it's where you live, where your house is, where your business is, or what you look like, or where you go to church. We often joke, and it's probably not the best joke, but we do discriminate by color. It's green. If we can make money at it and it's legal and ethical, we're going to try to do it. And there's some things. I mean, you've got to help your community. We are a community bank. We only do as well as the community where we are. And if you take any part of our population and they don't have access to the financing, the counseling, to housing, any of the things that they should have access to, we're hurting our community. So it's selfishly in our best interest, if for no other reason than that, to help the community be the best that it could be, and to make sure everybody's lifted up. And so that's a long speech, but why we don't think we need a CRA law, but we do agree with the goals and the purpose of having it.
One part of or related to CRA that I've been hearing a lot about from banks and that I think has probably generated some controversy on both sides is around ESG risk and climate related financial risks. And again, speaking to someone from Texas, there's been a lot of controversy on both sides of how much banks should or should not take ESG risk into account in their lending activities or in managing their portfolio. Typically, it sounds like it's more the larger banks, but has that come across your desk yet? Do you have a perspective on it?
We're wrestling with it, and probably wrestling with it more because we're public than if we were still private. We're a NASDAQ traded company. NASDAQ is implementing some rules around that. We're in the Russell 2000, so we have some funds that own us that are encouraging things around ESG. I think one of the things that you could put in risk as a core competency you need to deal with is governance. So that part's easy for us. We've always had a very strong governance structure, and we want the bank to be run well. Our directors have responsibilities, and we as management have responsibilities to do things properly. And so we feel that's kind of a laydown. The kind of the climate risk piece, we really struggle with that. One is we live on the Texas Gulf Coast. If we lived in other parts of Texas, we'd have similar types of issues, just a different risk. But we basically live in a swamp. Our entire franchise is located next to a giant body of water, and we're inches above it, and the whole area is flat as a tabletop. So if it rains, it's not, is it going to flood? It's where it's going to flood. So, we've always dealt with that in our credit underwriting. We deal with it when it comes to our operations and our employees. I mean, we can have a storm that dumps, it's not unusual to get 10, 12 inches of rain in 3 or 4 hours. I don't care where you are, you get 10 or 12 inches of rain in a very concentrated area, your streets are going to flood. So our employees can't get to work, our employees may flood. So we've got to deal with all those things, and we factor those into our risk structure. When we make loans, we got the same concerns. What's that going to do to a business if there's a hurricane? If you're manufacturing widgets and your plant's over here and a hurricane's going to wipe it out, we've got to factor that into our credit and find ways to mitigate it, whether it's how your plant's built, where it is, what kind of insurance you have, advance rates, all those things that we might do. So we've always done those things. So that part isn't really new to us. And the energy piece of this is, fossil fuels is tough. I mean, we are the energy capital of the world. We used to joke, and it's not quite the same anymore, but we are dependent on the fossil fuel industry. The dry cleaners in this town doesn't sell shirts or exist if there's no fossil fuel, not because they need it to run their plant, but so many of their customers are employed in those industries. So, and we're not a big oil and gas lender, primarily because we don't have the expertise in-house, but it's not something we shy away from. And we think as we go forward, we will probably, again, I don't want to say anything that should be disclosed on an AK or anything, but my personal opinion is I can't imagine we will would shy away from those businesses, mainly because they're a key part of our community.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I personally think that this will create business opportunities. I think you've already seen some hedge funds or venture capital deals that are really formed to take care of some of this stuff as everybody divests from it. There'll be money to be made for somebody.
Right. Interesting. So I want to go back to something you said earlier about time, and the one thing that we all wish we had more of was time, and looking back on our lives, on where we spent our time and how we spent it, and in the tiny scale at our jobs, and you've been on both sides of the table. When you're a director, when you're a CEO type, or even when you're a C-suite type, having to manage your time and know what to prioritize. How do you communicate risk issues and matters like the risk appetite or emerging risks up to the directors in a way that respects the time they need for things like growing the business or pursuing some of the mergers that you've talked about over the years? So how do you keep that in check, where you remember the bank is there for the larger purpose of making a profit from banking?
Well, I think one of the challenges you have in any, I'll call it, non-frontline or non-revenue producing position is to remember the things you do impact the ability uh, of the revenue producers to produce that revenue and or produce it efficiently. So like BSA report and compliance reports up through our risk structure. Um, you know, we can be the best BSA bank in the world. We may not have any accounts, and if we get to that point, we really don't need any BSA people. So you got to balance that compliance with producing revenue and serving your community, and it's always a challenge. And as far as communicating it up through the organization, I mean, we are bankers after all. Our core competency is sitting in meetings, so we do that very well. But we all the way up through our board, we believe that we do a lot of work in small groups and in committees. So if there's a risk committee around something, if it's financial crimes or compliance, and we do a lot of the heavy lifting there. And as we go up the chain, we continue to report that work all the way up to our board committees so they can understand it, and then they report it to the board. Um, we try to give them condensed reports as best we can. And probably the biggest benefit of ERM has been the advent of so many dashboards and things that if you do them right, you can really give your board, your management and your board, a really good picture of things going on as you look at where you are in things and what your limits around those are. And then it's easy to have action plans to deal with improving or getting better or staying where you are. And I think the board, especially, that's helped them a lot. I mean, we don't walk in and dump 1,000 pages on them and say here's our risk stuff. Let us know if you have questions. We're going to make it as succinct as we can. And I think the farther you go up in the organization, the more you have to do that. It's probably not the best answer in the world, but we're throwing a lot of information at everybody, and then we have to be available to answer their questions and encourage them to ask those questions.
Yeah. So some of those products you talk about are like the dashboards and things and the reporting programs. They are great. I have seen them in action, and some of them are quite sophisticated. Being a community bank, though you don't have unlimited resources. And so when you're thinking about building out parts of a risk function or going into a new area of risk, like when you're talking about some of the things around BSA or CRA data, how do you manage that tension of buying the shiny kind of off the shelf reporting package versus developing something with your own resources or something that can just get the job done for a bank of your size? What's that tension like for you?
Well, we've done a lot of things. We've got 2 proprietary products called Excel and Word, and we've learned to use those very well. And we do a lot of things in that. In terms of our risk programming, we use Excel spreadsheets a lot to do our risk assessments and aggregate some of that data. It's primitive, but it gets the job done. We have a GSC system that we utilize for some of it, but I think we share an opinion that most of the chief risk officers I talk to share, and that is that there isn't we haven't found a perfect GRC system that we can afford. what seems to happen is GRC systems are, you know, I got a system that is great at risk assessments and it may be the best in the industry, but I don't
Hmm.
have any of the other things. So I add all those on and I go sell my system. Well, it is great at risk assessments, but it's horrible at three other things or mediocre at three other things compared to the next guy who's really good at one of those and he has a risk assessment system that's mediocre. Um, we in the price ranges that most banks our size can afford, we just haven't found that. So we still do a lot of things, I'd say manually on Excel and Word and continue to aggregate that stuff and write a lot of reports in it and pass it up. I think when it comes to something, CRA data, that all comes out of your core. And
Hmm.
there's some really good programs that aren't real expensive that aggregate that and do what you need there. I'd say BSA is a little bit different animal.
Hmm.
There's a fair um, body of knowledge that says things like BSA over invest in because the failure to invest enough is too catastrophic.
Hmm.
So you may want to overinvest there, and that
Hmm.
area has been changing so much. And when you think about BSA, I mean you're literally monitoring every transaction that goes through the bank.
Hmm.
You can't do that without a really good tool. And we're fortunate enough we upgraded ours about 3 years ago to one of the state of the art tools. Has artificial intelligence, has machine learning, all those buzzwords you hear, and
Hmm.
it's continually updated, and they probably do 2 or 3 releases a week on new
Mm.
things or upgrading things,
Hmm.
and it's a pretty good job just to stay abreast of that. But in that area, we have done, as we grow, we'll spend more money on a GSC system, GRC
Hmm.
system, and finally get it to where we need it to be,
Yeah.
as well as the other. I mean, we'll just most banks our size, outsource their core, so there's a lot of good vendors out there we can go to. You just have to find the right one, and um, hope you pick when you pick them, and the time frame you picked them was right.
Yeah. Speaking of things that are expensive, and it's a one that's near and dear to my heart because I'm a lawyer, is that lawyers are quite an expensive proposition for banks, and I hear from clients that they always are looking for ways to make their legal spend more efficient, make the interactions better, and so thinking about when your function, when the risk function works with particularly external counsel, what's something you wish that we knew on the outside on how we could help you better?
That we didn't want to illustrate anything. No. Well, I think we're fortunate in most cases, at least in our bank. Most of the lawyers, a vast majority of them, try to be pretty efficient. Um, there's some where you get into things that we had a BSA issue, which is public information, and we spent a lot of money with lawyers on that. Uh, I'm not sure there's $1 we spent that we wanted to spend or feel good about spending. And we wish we could have gotten, hey, this is going to cost X amount of dollars, but you just don't know. I think those are the remote outside things, and those are going
Hmm.
to happen, and you just really can't control those. In general, I mean, we just like the lawyers to say, hey, this is what I think it's going to cost you. Here's why, and if I'm getting outside of that before I get to that number, I'll let you know, and we'll talk about it.
Hmm.
And we want you guys to make a living. We kind of do. We don't want to give you guys too much credit because then we can't beat up on you all the time. But
Right.
you guys add a value. We 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 like to be efficient with your time and ours. I get to work on some of our leases and stuff, and I've got a lawyer that just handles leases for us, and he knows that he's not going to do anything until I've negotiated the entire lease and I've looked at all my points in it and gotten those fixed. Then I'll send it to him for the end. And what I don't want him to do is come back and tell me how to do the business points. Give me the legal points. Tell me where I'm at risk and what I should do. And if I don't do it, how acceptable is that? What am I taking on? And
Right.
if we do that, it's very efficient for us.
Mhm. Great. Well, that's good to hear. And so, last question is Is there anything you wish you knew when you were first starting out, we'll say a decent time ago in banking or more recently in risk management, something that maybe some of our younger listeners who are just starting out their career in law or in banking could benefit from?
My first one is I wished I'd have, instead of getting my MBA, taken my admission to law school and not gone into banking, but I wasn't smart enough to do that. Uh, so, I think it's probably do the right thing. I mean, don't just be true to yourself. I know that sounds stupid, but this is a people business. All of us. If you look up 200 banks on the internet and go to their core values, integrity is going to be a critical one. If on every one of them,
Mhm.
it's amazing how many times you see people compromise their integrity for something, and it comes back to bite them somewhere in their career. So, I'd always say put that first. Uh, you know, you and I'm at near the end of my career, so it's much easier for me to say this. But when I was younger, I was a workaholic because I had to be. Um, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation how to manage that time. I failed miserably at balancing work life balance. It was work, and then everybody got what was left over after that. So the sooner and better you can do that, probably the happier and healthier you'll be, and probably the more successful. I mean,
Mhm.
especially as a lawyer, billing hours. I mean, working 14, 16 hours a day really helps you work, but how long can
Mhm.
you do that?
Yeah. Well, Jim, thank you so much for participating in the Credibly Challenged podcast. It was really great hearing about your journey through banking and the different perspectives you had on your way to becoming a risk leader. And thank you to our audience as well for tuning in. Please stay tuned to our next episode of Credibly Challenged out in about a month or so.